when the nation with the greatest tradition of the rule of law is plagued by unprecedented lawlessness, then it's time for new leadership for the United States of America.
Donald Trump was a politician like we've never really seen before. The way he talked and governed was like no one else. But some saw how the rise and fall of Trump mirrored a past president. They were reminded of a political campaign that featured the phrases law and order and bring our country back, and the frequent references to violent crime. Donald Trump's campaign for president in 2016 was eerily similar to that of Richard Nixon's in 1968. And that was intentional. Donald Trump and his former campaign manager were very open about their using the Nixon playbook. But although they had similar journeys to the White House, when it came to re-election, Trump wouldn't come close to pulling off what Nixon had. So today we're going to look at how Trump followed and then very much didn't follow the Nixon playbook. First, the historical moments were pretty similar. Both elections followed a summer of relative unrest and chaos, the Democratic Convention and political assassinations of 1968 versus the police violence protests and subsequent police assassinations of the summer of 2016. You can read the convention speeches of either candidate as stoking fear and presenting themselves as a solution.
The wave of crime is not going to be the wave of the future in the United States of America.
The crime and violence that today afflicts our nation will soon, and I mean very soon, come to an end.
They also followed decades of liberal progress, the civil rights legislation and Supreme Court cases of the 1960s, and the Obama years of the 2010s. And at least part of Nixon's and Trump's success is due to the countercurrents against either era. Both of them hated institutional media outlets. Nixon was quoted as calling them liberal bastards, and Trump has often called them the enemy of the people. Nixon would use television, which at the time was a growing technology dominated by 3 network platforms that hosted a smattering of news, entertainment, and advocacy. Nixon could stage panels, manufacture applause, and speak directly to the voter without being moderated or fact-checked.
I think it's one thing to give him hell, it's something else to give him Humphrey.
Trump did the same thing with social media, another growing technology dominated by 3 platforms that host a smattering of news, entertainment, and advocacy, and struggle to fact-check a high volume of content. But the talking points is where you really see the similarities between the 2 campaigns. Nixon would use phrases like law and order and peace with honor to court voters on either end of the political spectrum, and Trump did the same thing. He'd recycle the phrase law and order and emphasize a border wall to gain support among conservatives, but he also very actively sought to peel away liberal votes from Hillary Clinton. Trump did this most clearly on the Today Show in April of 2016. This was after he had secured the Republican nomination and just before the primary states in liberal states like Connecticut and Rhode Island. Go back and watch that interview. It'll absolutely blow your mind. In it, he came out against the North Carolina transgender bathroom law, said he would update the Republican platform's hardline abortion stance by adding exceptions for rape, incest, and maternal health, said he would raise taxes on the wealthy. He even said that he'd be so presidential that we'd all be bored with his government. In an earlier 60 Minutes interview, he said that he'd get government-funded universal health coverage. By playing both sides of the political aisle, it's no surprise that Trump got 1 in every 10 Bernie Sanders voters when he'd only get half that amount in 2020. Trump even replicated this weird misunderstanding where people thought, because he might have implied it, that Nixon had a secret plan to win the Vietnam War. Trump executed that play by implying that he had a secret plan to defeat ISIS in Iraq.
And I do know what to do, and I would know how to bring ISIS to the table or beyond that defeat ISIS very quickly, and I'm not going to tell you what it is tonight.
The Nixon strategy requires a moment of chaos, circumventing institutional media, playing both sides of the political aisle, and maybe throwing out there that there's some awesome secret plans that you can't tell anyone about. But there's a final part of this strategy if you want to get reelected. Both Trump and Nixon narrowly won over their Democrat opponents, but their re-election tallies would tell very different stories. Trump would lose his bid for re-election by a narrow margin, but Nixon killed George McGovern in 1972, winning one of the most lopsided presidential elections in U.S. history. To pull off the full Nixon, you have to transition from political campaigner to presidential statesman. You have to become, to use Trump's words, so presidential that we all get bored with government. Nixon's re-election landslide came after a first term where he executed the most broadly appealing form of governance. He expanded civil rights laws, passed new environmental protections. He made some smart but boring adjustments to the U.S. tax code. He drew down forces in Vietnam, and the country actually had less governmental unrest. The effects of the worst things that he did, starting the war on drugs and appointing Supreme Court justices that would dismantle Brown versus Board of Education, wouldn't be appreciated on a grand scale until after he left office. Well, I mean, some people would know how those things would turn out. Plain and simple, he just did some old-fashioned government maintenance and political majority building. After Donald Trump pulled off an election victory that he himself didn't think was possible, he didn't stop campaigning. For Donald Trump, campaigning was the means and the end. So temperatures stayed hot. Muslim ban, pressuring foreign governments to investigate a political opponent, saying racist stuff, an attempt to obstruct justice, increases in looting and violence, a heinous child separation border policy. No matter what you thought about Trump's policies, the last 4 years weren't quiet. And I've seen that Biden got politically lucky with the pandemic and how Trump was politically hurt by it, and I'm not sure about that. There's ample examples of it actually being a political benefit to heads of governments around the world, but I thought one of the more telling narratives of election night was how Biden flipped Georgia and Arizona, homes to the late statesmen John Lewis and John McCain, who'd been ridiculed and disrespected by Trump. Nixon would have never made the unforced error of saying that he liked veterans who hadn't been caught or trash-talking a civil rights icon's history of fighting injustice. And because Trump didn't pull a full Nixon and make the transition into being a dull, broadly appealing president, which of course in hindsight he was never going to do, he opened himself up to being defeated by Nixon's very own 1968 playbook.
Who will keep you safer as president? When I was vice president, violent crime fell 15% in this country. We did it without chaos and disorder. The murder rate now is up 26%. Do you really feel safer under Donald Trump?
Joe Biden's entire campaign was centered around the idea that Trump's America is unruly and chaotic, and that he's the solution that can bring back law and order and normalcy. And finally, Trump solidified comparisons with Nixon with the distinction of being the only president to have been impeached twice, and to also have been impeached in the most bipartisan impeachment vote ever. Nixon was never actually impeached, but his resignation after obstructing justice in the Watergate investigations is regarded as the closest thing to presidential removal that we've ever gotten. Trump's approval ratings tanked after the storming of the Capitol, and his position as a leader is as low as it gets. Comparisons are ultimately imperfect. Comparing Nixon's dog whistle Southern strategy to Donald Trump feels like comparing a catfish to a shark. It's not worth the ink. Trump's art fits Nixon's pretty well, but ultimately these two candidates will go down in history as being effective and harmful in their own uniquely extraordinary ways. Thanks for watching. I hope you'll follow or subscribe wherever you found this video and keep up with the context of today's news.